Good evening and welcome to our webinar tonight. We're excited that you've chosen to join us for Scaffolding, Digital Tools, Resources, and Activities. This is the third webinar of our Digital Genius series here in Coppell ISD. And we just want to thank you for choosing to spend an hour of your night, maybe in your pajamas, but with us nonetheless. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. Um, we'd like to introduce you to our team today, and I'm going to go ahead and start my webcam really quickly so that you can see your hosts. I'm Allie Pryor, and with me is
Stephanie Ryan.
And we're really glad to be hosting this scaffolding webinar for you. We're not going to scare you with our faces for too long, but we are your wonderful hosts tonight. And you'll be stuck listening to us for the next hour. Also with us tonight are our moderators, Tammy Martins and Tony Dowdy. They are kind of acting as our chat moderators, as well as kind of handling any of your requests behind the scenes. So as you're kind of chatting in and saying hello, Tammy and Tony are going to be monitoring that discussion and kind of feeding Stephanie and I some of your questions throughout tonight. Also on our call tonight will be our technical support line. Nancy Garvey is standing by to help anyone who maybe has any technical glitches throughout the day's event. So if you do get kicked off of the webinar and can't get back on, or if you experience sound issues, Nancy Garvey can be reached at ngarvey@coppellisd.com. All right. Oh, I love seeing all the hellos in the chats. We're really glad to see you guys. Here are a few ways that you guys can participate with us tonight using our Adobe Connect participation tools. Over to the left side of your screen, you're seeing our participant panel. iPad users, yours may look a little bit different than the screenshot that we're showing right now, but you also have these tools. Tonight, we're going to encourage you to keep a discussion going via the chat panel. From time to time, we're going to ask you to chat in ideas or answer questions, but you can also use this throughout our webinar to interact with each other. Tammy and Tony will be moderating and feed any questions to address for the whole group to Stephanie and I. We also want you to know that you do have some controls up at the top portion of your Adobe Connect participant window. Just so you know, you can control your sound, and you also have a little man who looks like he's raising his hand. At some points in our evening tonight, we'll be hosting some discussion questions, and at that point, you're going to be able to choose whether or not you want to just chat using our chat panel, or if you want to raise your hand and activate your microphone. So during our discussion questions, we may ask you to participate verbally if you choose, and if so, you'll just go in and raise your hand, and then we'll call on you, which will activate your microphone. So if you're on an iPad, make sure that if you are going to be using your microphone at any point in the day's evening, I'm not sure if that even makes sense.
In the evening's events.
In the evening events, make sure that you do allow your microphone to interact. Usually on the iPad, it'll give you a little pop-up window, and you do have to allow the Adobe Connect app to interact with your microphone. If you're participating on a computer, good news and bad news. If your computer has a microphone, this would work. If your computer does not have a microphone, you might be just chatting with us in the chat panel tonight. So those are some of the different ways that you can actively participate with us.
Okay, so some of the learning outcomes that we're looking to get out of this session, even though we only have an hour of your time tonight, we're looking to define scaffolding within CISD and kind of what that means for all of us educators out here. We want to connect important design considerations to choosing a structure when going through the scaffolding ideas. And we want to be able to evaluate two specific structures of scaffolding and how they can be used digitally. So definitely looking for your feedback when it comes to these as well, so we can get a good idea of what's going on in the district.
Absolutely. Now, the thing about scaffolding is it's a pretty large concept to cover in 1 hour. And so, what we want you to know is we have some key learning objectives, but at the same time, we're going to also encourage you, if you have further questions after today, to get with your I-teamer and kind of work on some designs there. So, what we want you to do is take a second to think about how you define scaffolding. Because what I've found, Stephanie, is that if you asked any sampling of people throughout our district or even educators in general, the definition that they have of what they think scaffolding means is quite different. So we're going to encourage you to go ahead and use the chat panel to tell us what you would describe scaffolding as. So we'll give you guys a second to type that into the chat panel. And, the other thing about scaffolding is I tend to think of it as just good instructional strategies. But
Absolutely. It's going to look different in every classroom too. So we're really looking forward to the different responses we're going to get from you guys, because this is a
absolutely.
webinar for K through 12 educators and administrators and just different types of support staff. So it can look different from all different perspectives.
Absolutely. I love some of the things that I'm seeing, a structure upon which learning can grow.
Using prior knowledge to learn more and to grow. Perfect.
Love it. The ability to structure your lessons so that learners of all learning types and levels can grow. Alexis, I really like how you're looking at the whole picture of that classroom.
I love this test, offering students choices in products with different learning modes. Absolutely, because that differentiation piece is huge.
Absolutely. Individualizing instruction to meet learner needs.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Well, you guys go ahead and continue to kind of give us some of your ideas about how you define scaffolding. We'll keep that conversation going while we go ahead and put up just a little blurb about what CISD's philosophy on scaffolding is.
So you guys can read along as it's written on the screen. These are experiences designed by educators to provide support during the learning process and to respond to the needs of diverse learners. And that's pretty much what everyone has said in a nutshell, using different words. But this is something we want you guys to keep in mind as we go through this webinar, because we're always going to refer back to this definition as the foundation of scaffolding.
Absolutely. All right. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of an interesting experiment. We went out in the field and we kind of got a feel for what our learners think scaffolding is. And so for just a second, we're going to go ahead and share our screen with you. We'd like you to hear what our learners have to say about how they view scaffolding and what it means.
What if I'm like scavenger? It means like you're holding something the wrong way and then it all gets crumbled up. Like pieces of wood stacked up like thousands of like it looks like a house. There's a kitchen with a lot of food on the top. Yeah, but there's a ladder. Yeah. And when someone like runs around and like goes crazy, something you use to find prices and what the food are. Like sometimes the menus at restaurants they tell you like what food you can eat. Like in a restaurant, when you're taking an order, you look at the menu and you see what stuff, and then you look at something and it's vegetarian, and so you're a vegetarian, and so like you look at that and it doesn't have any meat in it and it sounds pretty good to you, then you order it. So like you were using the menu to make your order. Where the train doesn't go. He also keeps track of the time of which train is gonna come when at the station. In our class, we have like stations, Like we have like we have like we have computer station, iPad station, book station, and like a home station. Okay, so let's say you had Davy 5, and there were 5 stations. Word work on writing, read to self, read to someone, and listening to reading. But pick one station. Until that station was full, you had to pick another one. It's mainly fictional, but like a port is, it's like there you can use it in some terms. Like a port is like a portal. Like a portal, and you jump in the portal and you go back in time. Is like where an airplane stops and lands. Workshops are like things that you use for drill, cameras, all kinds of tools to make stuff out of other kinds of materials. And on this day, our teacher went to a science workshop where she learned stuff to share with our class, learn new stuff to share with our class, so we could learn new things. So that's a science workshop where where the electrical goes everywhere, and that's where the electricity comes from. The school is kind of like a digital learning environment, except they're not digital. So like if you look behind me, this is not digital. So like a digital is like when you see like a digital block, that's digital. So like a digital learning environment is probably something where you learn stuff about technology.
Right. So, just from seeing some of the chat comments, I have a feeling that you guys kind of enjoyed the take on scaffolding from our learners' point of view.
And it's always good to get that view from our learners, no matter what their age or experience is with this. It's good to hear what they know from their end. So, very cute way to put it together, too. So, I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Absolutely. So, a lot of times, I think when we think of design and we think of designing scaffolding structures within our classrooms, sometimes we get caught up in the details. Like, oh, I'm going to create these stations and it's going to be, we're going to need to have 4 groups of 7 and kind of getting so caught up in all those details that sometimes we do that before thinking about what truly we have in terms of needs within our classroom. And so to get us started, we're kind of going to look at some design considerations so that no matter which type of scaffolding you choose, we just want to remind you that some of these features and some of these things that are going on in your classroom are really what drives the scaffolding structure that you select. So all of these things like, thinking of your learning outcomes and what you're desiring to have the learners achieve. Things like the pre-assessment data that kind of really drive how often you might need to workshop with someone or if you need to workshop throughout your scaffolding event. All of these design considerations are really key. And one of the things, Stephanie, that was an aha moment for me was really looking at these design considerations and realizing that you aren't necessarily always thinking of every single one of them before you're designing scaffolding. And so for me, I always think, oh, everything I do has to have learner choice and voice. And maybe not necessarily. Depending on what your activity is and the whys behind what you need to have happen, that's how you really consider selecting your scaffolding.
Absolutely, and this really puts forth the idea of you have to have purpose behind what you're choosing. You can't just out of the blue say, "Oh, this looks like a good day for a workshop." You have to look at what are the truly what are the needs of your learners, whether that's based on their learning outcomes, the data, how what authentic audience are you trying to get them to relate to, and those kind of considerations that you can see right here. So that kind of moves us forward to the next part, which is our design structures. So this is where, when you look at your design considerations that we just talked about, you then move into, okay, what structure is going to be important and appropriate for my learners? And this is kind of how are they going to get the information and the learning outcomes that I need them to have? What will this look like in your classroom? How will the learners be grouped, and will they work in groups or individual? Is there a need for pull-out workshops? Things of that nature. And it's this is where we bring in the ports and stations and workshops and menus and which would fulfill those design considerations that you looked at first.
Absolutely. And really, as we're looking at design structures, we're thinking of designing an environment for our classrooms that does hit those different design considerations of learner need and things of that nature. So really, there's so many types of scaffolding structures that you could select, whether it's a menu for your students, because you really need them to be able to choose which activities they need to select, or whether it's a digital learning environment. Maybe you've decided that the content that you need to do is going to lend itself more to a flipped learning experience or a blended learning experience. No matter what design structure you select, you want to consider like what is really and truly important for that classroom. So that kind of gets us into a little bit more of our detailed piece of our webinar. So as we were looking at our content, we realized scaffolding itself is such a large concept. There's just not really a good way to cover everything about scaffolding in 1 hour. And so what we decided to do is take two structures of scaffolding and really go a little bit more in depth and look at how digital pieces can really assist with these two structures.
And Allie, one of the reasons that we decided to choose these two structures to talk to you guys about is because stations, as you can see on the screen in front of you, stations is something that we see happening all over the district right now. And historically was not really, it didn't have a big digital piece to it.
Right.
So that's grown, lately. And then ports is very similar to stations, but there's a distinct difference. And that's kind of something we wanted to distinguish this evening by showing you guys a few examples and getting into more discussion about these.
Absolutely. And then at the same time, stations and ports are one of those things where I think a lot of people are wondering, like, what's the difference between stations and ports? I mean, why do I select stations where maybe I select what content my kids are going to and they rotate to every single station, versus ports, which might be a little bit more of a learner choice, but still set out there for my learners to rotate through. So there are some similarities between the two.
Absolutely, and they can both foster a discussion where you still have a lot of that peer-to-peer learning, which is great, and you can fill in as a facilitator and fill in those gaps as you see needed. But regardless which structure between the stations and ports that you decide might be appropriate for your learners, both of these absolutely nurture that constructivist philosophy that we are all about in Capella ISD, and that it really, both of these structures allow our learners to create understanding that's meaningful and relevant, and it allows them just so much learner choice, which is what we value this,
Absolutely.
as we design things in this district.
Absolutely. So let's take a little bit more of an in-depth look at stations. And, really, stations are things that, educators have been doing for years. And, there's different stations are really done differently depending on the classroom that you're in. But really, when we think of stations, we're thinking about different places in the classroom where learners are working on tasks simultaneously and where those activities are linked by maybe the same standards. So typically all of our learners are going to be completing all of the stations within that rotation. And each station may offer choice or provide for differentiation, but at the same time, it's almost looked at as each learner at some point will rotate through each and every station within that classroom.
Absolutely, and this is also something too that, Allie has an elementary background and I have a secondary background, and we want to show too that it's amazing how you can incorporate stations in a K through 12 classroom and just in a very different way, and some huge similarities as well. So a lot of pieces that we're excited to show you about stations today.
Absolutely. And don't just consider stations as something of the past, because even though educators have been doing stations for a long time now, the stations of today, with the added pieces of technology and learner accountability, technology can really transform this learning structure and make it a little more efficient and organized. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and share our screen for you. And we're getting ready to take you.
We're going to go to it's a DIY website where we have a lot of educator examples of these different scaffolding structures, and it goes beyond just stations and ports. So you'll see menus and workshops, or a conglomeration of multiple scaffolding structures pulled into one. So like I said, we're going to be focusing on the stations and ports for this specific webinar, but we do have this website available to you guys that we'll send out at the end, so you can check out these examples across the district and how other educators are using the scaffolding structures.
Absolutely. And so basically, we're going to go ahead and feature an elementary station activity, an example from Katie Tonema and Marlene Natherson from Town Center. And so what we're going to do is go ahead and click on their example, and we're just going to take a look at some of the stations that they're running in their classroom. These stations are all based around the reading concept inferencing. And what they were able to do is, as you're seeing up on your screen, they actually were able to provide their learners a digital checklist so that their learners can kind of keep track of which stations they've been a part of. And one of the things that I think was really interesting is, and this is where technology can really kind of play into learner accountability, is one of their stations, they were able to provide a Google form for their learners. And so, as they're going and maybe workshopping with a particular group and the other kids are working within stations, these learners were able to do the activity within the station and then submit their answers digitally. So what that does is really opens it up for their educator. So there comes an accountability piece where I don't have to be sitting right there at that station to realize that A, you've done your work, and B, you either get it or you don't. So that really could provide some additional feedback and information to them. The other thing that you'll notice as we kind of scroll down is they were able to bring in some authentic pieces. They did have a music video that they were able to provide to their learners, and the learners were able to access that using a QR code and scan that, so that they were able to kind of bring in something and make inferences about a real life type of example. And then the last thing that I want to kind of play up for you guys here in this particular station's example is something that, it may not be an aha moment for everybody, but I'll tell you that for some of us, the smartboard, usually you think of your smartboard and you think of your whole class, sitting in front of the smartboard, and, maybe I as a learner get up and touch one thing and get to interact with one thing during that whole class environment. Well, what they've done is they've actually made the Smart Notebook files accessible on their web page. And so what learners are doing in this particular station is they're going to their educator's website and downloading the Smart Notebook file on a MacBook or a PC or on the desktop. And they're able to interact with that because the Smart Notebook software works without even having to touch the board. They're just using it within their own computer station. And I think that is something that can really blow the water open, because you don't necessarily have to have all of your kids crowded around a board in order to really get some of the benefits. So those are just a couple of ways that digital elements have kind of enhanced stations at the elementary level.
Absolutely. And I'm going to show you guys a quick secondary example as well. We're going to pull up a website in just a second to show you guys how one of our secondary educators has used the stations. And while that's happening, I would also like to do a plug for the Smartboard as well. And Jennifer Furnish, I believe you're joining us today on the webinar. We run stations in her class before over at Coppell High School. And she has used the Smartboard as an individual station. So as the learners are moving around the room, the Smartboard is one of the stations that they hit. So they might be in a group of 2 or 3, but they are utilizing that Smartboard as one tool. So in just a second, we're going to pull this up for you. Yeah. Okay, so on your screen, you should be able to see, no, actually, this is the ports. We're going to go to that.
Okay, hold on just a second.
Station,
sorry. There we go. Don't mind the ladies behind the curtain. Sorry about that, everybody.
Well, mix upon our legs. Okay, so we have these stations were created by one of our geography teachers here at Coppell High School, and what I just want to show you were required to move a bit here and there around the room, but they also had the access to all the stations on whatever device they were on, whether that would have been an iPad or a MacBook. But it gave the outline of the stations on this homepage. So it's, they were doing these stations over Tuesday or the next 3 days, but 2 stations per day. So they were assigned a group number and they rotated from one station to the next. And some of these stations are repeated, so that's why we're not going to go through a whole lot of them.